Very much. The speakers were open for questions.
Thank you for a wonderful session. Although Benny was in a minority here, I have to say that I tend to agree with him. The question that I wanted to ask you, I think you took an easy test case. I mean, the most easiest test case is from the Nana. A lot wrote about it, and it's quite convincing, although some maybe not in the extreme that you wanted to say. It's not black and white. There are, I agree with Hanina, and look and practice, there are some things that you should be more, but it's more interesting to see if the changes of the post-Talmudic period and inside what's called Chatima Sifrutut, Havlin's, you're coming from Geonim to Rishonim, what makes from Rishonim to Achronim, the birth of the state of Israel, the Haskalah. These historic moments that made sub-periods in the post-Talmudic, do you find there as well theological connection between maybe the ideas that they had about God or their philosophy to the structure of halacha? Because obviously you can find at least two periods, the reaction to Haskalah, a lot wrote about it, you know, the Briskers or Khatam Sofer, and of course have a lot of articles of Aryeh Drey about, you know, how they reflect to the birth of the state of Israel. Of course, that changes the way of structuring the halacha in a more sophisticated way. So this is something that I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask Hanina. You asked a question at the end, a very important question. Is it only rhetoric or does it have connection? Well, and that's a very good question. Actually, you have it in the Talmud. Darshinan tama dikra, lo darshinan tama dikra. But I think, again, I always jump to Maimonides. You should ask, does it change the structure of this halacha? Of course it does. I'll give you one example. There are a lot of chapters, pages about zugot, about ghosts, and about all these things. He threw everything away. He threw everything away, did not decide according to that. Even the Kotzker Rav said something very funny. It says in the Talmud there are ghosts, there are a lot of... What happened? He said after Maimonides declared there are not, so they disappeared. So it's a new sort of revolution. And have a lot of examples of his tendency to codification. Codification, as you say, it's against the essence of Jewish law, of Talmudic law. You have debates, and Maimonides wants monolithic, systemized system. Isn't it something because of his philosophy and his tendency to rationalize and to systemize everything? I think it does change, not in a direct way that everything is black and white, but it does in a delicate way what you emphasize and what you don't, or the way that you structure things, it does have the influence. So it's actually questions for both of you.
Maybe I'll begin with one question. Of course, the story does not stop at the Tannaitic or Talmudic period, and there are many other chapters that should be told. Now, I agree with you that not every change, every historical change from one period to another has theological roots or jurisprudential application. For example, the change from the world of the Tanaim to the world of the Amoraim is a very dramatical change from many aspects, but I'm not sure that we can identify any dramatic theological changes and also jurisprudential dramatic changes, and therefore I'm not sure that this is part of the story. But no doubt that when it comes to the world of the Geonim and Maimonides, for example, then we can see the footprints of the connection between theology and jurisprudence. And you mentioned the mysticism and Kabbalah, so of course, as long as Mekubalim are not dealing with jurisprudence and law, we won't see any changes in their structural understanding of jurisprudence. But if you take, for example, one scholar like Nachmanides and his disputes with legal disputes with Maimonides, so one can argue that these jurisprudential disputes have a very clear theological roots, and disputes in the Hasagot to Sefer HaMitzvot between Ramban and Rambam, between Nachmanides and Maimonides, has both jurisprudential application and theological roots, and therefore I think this is a good example of playing at the same ground simultaneously.
No, can I say something? Sorry. No, I understand that the theological, Nachmanides' theological views impact on his understanding of halakha, right? But does that change, your claim, I think, is that it changes the underlying structure, right, of the system. Does the system change? I don't think so. Just the understanding of
Not specific halakha, but they are very...
In what way? The question is what way?
In what way? If you,
So let me respond to last question. Suppose you have two legal systems, totally identical. In case one system claims to be of divine origin. The other does not claim to be of a divine origin. Now the only difference is that claim. So if we talk about the rhetoric of the two systems, of course there is a huge difference. But if you are talking about the way the two systems are functioning, you won't see any difference. So it is just rhetoric that we are talking about. Now in my view, in order to say that a legal system is of a religious nature, or is religious, and I think here I agree with you, it's not enough to show that it contains norms that are dealing with some kind of religious ritual. Of course, if you have an ideology, religious ideology, you will have norms that deal with religious ideology. You may create new norms, you may abolish old norms, and new theology may generate new norms. But that is, in my view, not enough. What we have to show is that the practicing of the law, that the law acts differently. The mechanism of the law is different. And if you don't show that the mechanism of the law is different from a non-religious legal system, that's what I said before, a difference has to make a difference to be a difference. If you want to say that this is a different legal system, not by virtue of its norms, every legal system is different from a different one by its norms. You take a legal system in a capitalistic regime or a non-capitalistic regime, you will see different norms. Of course, law of inheritance will be very different from inheritance. So the question is not whether norms can be added or thrown away. The question is whether the functioning of the system is different in such a way that we are justified to say this is a religious legal system because of its way of functioning. For example, reliance on miracles. For example, non-ability to decide which position is the acceptable one. If we have scholars around this table arguing about something, we disagree with it, we end up saying, well, we can't agree, we have to accept and follow all views. Now, if it's a non-religious regime, we'll say, let's take a vote, let's decide. If we can't decide by following the majority, that is something that deals with the mechanisms of the law. It's not just the norm, it's the functioning of the system.
So according to that, even Islamic law is not religious, no?
Islamic law, well, I'm saying, Islamic law
Is
has...
there any religious law according to this definition today? I'm really asking.
Whether there's a religious... Yeah, of course, American law, for example, to the extent that it has a special status for the Constitution, has a religious element. Why does this document have special status? Is it not a leftover idea of the Bible, of the divine will, or something like that, that has to be kept intact? Much less than you can't deal with it as you deal with regular law. So I'm saying every legal system has some religious elements, but in order to show it, it's not enough to show the content of the norm, the function of the system.
Just, I want to understand this. If you had two systems that have the same laws, one of them is religious, the other one is not religious, but the religious one has something called Chai B'din Shamayim. For example, we have the same laws when it comes to Nezikin, or the same law when it comes to Kinyan. And you have to pay. If you're responsible, you have to pay. And if you're not responsible, you don't have to pay. But B'din Shamayim, you have to pay in the religious law. That doesn't exist in the other one.
That's right.
So there is a difference,
If there is such a difference, then they are not identical.
but there is
I
a,
assume that they are both identical.
but they're identical in the execution implementation in the courts.
Fine.
But they're not identical in the moral value that they have, because
Execution and remedies are
Chai
part of
b'nei
the system.
Shamayim means if you wanna be a good person, then you have to pay.
Yeah. Okay, so if there is such a law that Chayav b'dinei shamayim, in my view, it is mere rhetoric. What does it mean, Chayav b'dinei shamayim? The one who doesn't want to pay, what is a regard? Yeah, sure. So it's just rhetoric. But if
the law
it does
has a
affect,
moral content.
yeah,
The law has a moral content.
moral is a different issue. We're talking about the legal.
Well, it's a religious moral content.
It's even legal, according to some commentators. It's illegal.
If it
It's illegal, but it's not compelled by the court. But it's legal. It's not only religious.
If it is legal, if it does make a difference, if people take it seriously, then the two systems are not identical.
Yeah, you're gonna take it to the absurd, then we'll never be able to find such a thing.
No, we will.
Anytime that there is some difference.
No, we will. As I
I'm
said.
saying if you start with the assumption that what makes it equal is court implementation, just what the courts can do.
Yeah.
And in both cases, the courts can do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, are instructed. But this has a different additional obligation that is not court forced, right? It's not, then you have the same law, but you have a different aspect, a new aspect to it.
So what's the difference between two legal systems? In one case, people are very moral and take into account moral behavior, moral demands. In the other system, they only go by what the law requires. So again, the system is identical, but in one case they are more.
No, that's how people behave. That's different. That's how people behave. Some people may behave more moral than others, but here you have a real conscience. There's a,
If it is a legal argument, if it is part of the system, then they are not identical in my view. They are not identical.
Thank you very much for the three presentations. First of all, Benny, I think it would help. I mean, I understand it's an ongoing project. I think it would be helpful if you refine the terminology that you use. What's the difference between a shift and a paradigm shift, between a revelation, between changes in values, changes in ideology, changes in, you referred to Halbetal. I think Halbetal, even though he spoke about the birth of Halacha, I think he was very cautious. I think he used the term different religious sensitivities rather than a whole theology. So I think it would be really helpful where, you know, a good tuning and finding of this concept. Now, and by the way, about the image of God, Chazal, I absolutely agree with Chaim. I think that if we compare the amount of knowledge that we have about the image of God in the Bible and the image of God of Chazal, we know very little. Absolutely very little. We can say that in the Bible, God is the Father, is a warrior, is the lover. I mean, we have a very, I would say, known and designated ideas about the image of God. When we come to Chazal, it's all mixed up. It's all mixed up, and some of the images absolutely inconsistent with the Bible, right? The biblical God could not be God who says, Nitzchu li banai, even though he's a father, but he's not the defeated father. And I have got the sense, actually, that Chazal, in a way, not only created the rich, overlapping metaphors about God. God is father, he's a king, he's a rabbi, and some of them are actually self-contradicting, but I think they avoided, and that has to do maybe with Christianity as a raising religion in the same period, they avoid clear images of God. Not for the Maimonidean reasons, I don't know for what exact reasons, but they avoid a clear-cut images of God, and they had multi-images. But now I would like to refer also to the presentation of Hanina, where he spoke about religious legal system. I think that we should also be cautious about the three elements of this conception, starting from religious, right? reading Talal Asad nowadays, we cannot speak about religion as a category which is clear from ideology, as we speak also the ideology of the law. But religious or religion as a category is definitely related to some European. You mentioned Carl Schmitt. Carl Schmitt also actually saw the range between religion and secularism as related to a concrete tradition. To what extent we could apply religion and secularism to Islamic tradition is a big question. To what extent Boyarin, for example, I think he convincingly made the point that we don't find any evidences that the Jews prior to the 3rd century were identified as a religion, rather as an ethnos. So to what sense we can talk about the Mishnah as a religious legal system? Apparently we have some conception of what religion is. You said like oracle, right? But if you ask Maimonides, is oracle a religious or divine issue? He would say this is idolatry. This is not religious at all. So I think we also have to do some to purify the conception, and also about systematization, religious legal system. Obviously the Mishnah is an attempt to systemize the law. Definitely the Talmud is an attempt to desystemize, to deconstruct the clear-cut, organized, systemized. So again, I'm not sure, maybe we have varieties also of concept of systems in that regard. By the way, moving from the biblical conception of the law to Chazal, we also skip the Second Temple, which we have also some other options. Philo, for example, he, in the Septuagint 100 years before, they suggested the idea to identify the Torah with nomos. A suggestion we didn't raise up until some point in the Middle Ages. So, in the biblical law, again, I said about religious, I said about system. Let's one word about law. When we talk about the biblical law, right? The biblical law is part of a larger framework, which is the covenantal relations between God and Israel. So, a law which comes after an existing commitment, an obligation, is a different law than which comes from out of legislation or enactment or something like that. So I'm not even sure that each of the 3 terms, law, legal, system, and religious, are any stable concepts which go from the biblical times to Second Temple times to the Rabbinic period. You said Maimonides, and even now up to our days, as Chaim mentioned. Thank you.
So let me just respond to it. I couldn't agree more with your remarks. Thank you very much for bringing that. And I totally agree with everything you said.
You could stop here.
Stop here, yeah. That is true. I could stop here. But I just want to explain one more thing. I was driven to this paper, Is Talmudic Law a Religious Legal System? Because I read everywhere. Jewish law is the religious law, Mishpat Dati. You read it everywhere, by traditional scholars, by people who are against Jewish law, people who are for Jewish law. Every phenomenon, strange phenomenon in the Jewish legal system is explained by the fact it is a religious law, Mishpat Dati. So I was driven to find out what does it mean, a religious legal system. And I agree with you. My point was not to show that there is such a thing as a religious legal system, quite the opposite. To show that there is no such thing as a religious legal system. And there are many different features that might appear here and might appear there. And in fact, the aim is to deconstruct the notion Jewish or religious legal system. So I fully agree with you. They are not stable concepts. They change over time, they change over cultures. But still, we have some intuition when we speak about a legal system. We have some intuition when we speak about religion. So people can speak very easily about a religious legal system. So yeah, I agree that the point was not to show that there is such a thing, quite the opposite.
Yeah, I have some very, very brief comments that could be elaborated, but I'll be brief, and then a question. So for brief, I happen to agree mainly with your critics. Half of what you said I would agree with, but not half I would, maybe less than half. But and then I would not have full agreement with the latter remarks either. I think our easiest forms of understanding a religion are really idolatry that you can understand Onkelos understands it well, understands it as error and things like this. So, it's very difficult to establish what Tannaitic theology actually is, and that we should be alerted to. I'll give one simple example again. If you see the raging controversy over my remarks about Be'etzba Elohim, and Ki'ilu Be'etzba, that still every once in a while gets a new proponent to it, and I've not yet responded to them, and I will at some point respond. So you can see that there are those who see Chazal as anthropomorphizers and those who don't. So just on a very small thing that could affect many other ideas. If you have Lechatchila and B'diavad up on the board, of course, that's not Tannaitic at all. There is no, I don't know of any Tannaitic Lechatchila and B'diavad. I only know of Amoraim who receive it and then use that category. Similarly, for the issue of error, if you would take Horayot as an example, whereas the Tanaim see error as a possibility, the Amoraim do not. I've argued that the error is so inconceivable to them and so finely tuned that since they can't really err, that they in fact have created a system of infallibility well before the Pope. And I think that to some extent that still is with us, that notion of infallibility. So those are my various comments, and maybe I have a few more. But my question is, we have about 1,000 books on the Tannaitic period by Jacob Neusner. I think over
No, it's 1,001 now.
Huh?
It's 1,001 now.
Oh, no. He has maybe about 2,000 books that he's published in his lifetime. And now he's recently deceased. He just died this past year. So yes. And so my question is that if you're going to deal with the theology, which is one of the central questions he addresses, and its relationship to law, how has he influenced your thinking?
This is similar to your point. This remark of yours is similar to the point you raised.
What?
That theology is not a unified theme in the Tannaitic time. That's what you said.
Well, no, it's a question, and we'll let him deal with it whatever way he wants.
So I would like to react to a few comments with respect to Yossi and Chaim and also to you, Harry. So of course, there is no attempt to argue that the theological world is at a very high resolution and find all the changes and the dispute with regard to the image of law. The question is whether we can generalize some insight. And I think it's hard to deny the fact that the world where prophets and priests are the general players, and a world where the sage, the halachic sage, is the general player, is a different legal and theological world. So I think in my view, after we take into account all of this, I think justified comment and critiques, I think one can try to argue that there is some general characteristic that makes the Tannaitic world to be distinct from the biblical one. Another comment with regard to the question of error, and I think is I think that Hanina raised, and also is the last comment. No doubt that when the Tanaim are dealing in Masechet Arayot, taking some inspiration from the biblical verses with regard to V'ne'elam kol ha'ne'elam b'yedei ha'ida, but we have to remember that there are significant differences between the verses themselves that are not speaking about error in the law. It's hard to understand what is the meaning ne'elam b'yedei ha'ida, but probably it's not ne'elam from the eyes of the court, and the Tanaim are interpreting this in a complete different way, and there is an option of error in the interpretation itself. If we see a kind of structure of חזרו להורות כדברי בית שמאי או כדברי בית הלל, so someone was convinced that his previous interpretation was error, and therefore he needs to agree with the ones that he has dispute with. So even though it's not has a title of error, the fact that there is a dispute, there are people that are convincing that they have to change their interpretation. I think this is a reflection of kind of recognizing the option of error, if I'm not error at this point.
A better example is Sanhedrin the Shikul Hadat of
Yeah.
Dvar Mishnah. That's totally new. It's not like Korayot.
Absolutely.
That's new.
It's not new.
Not totally Dvar Mishnah of Sanhedrin.
No.
Where do you see it in the Bible?
No. You don't see it in the Bible. But the notion of To'eh b'Dvar Mishnah or To'eh b'Shikul Hadat is basically an error caused by ignorance. It is not an error based on misinterpretation of the law. The Talmud as a whole does not recognize an error and an erroneous interpretation of the law. What the Talmud recognizes is an erroneous decision based on ignorance. The judge or the court was unaware of a certain Mishnaic ruling or of a certain judicial practice. Only those unawareness may be regarded as erroneous, generally erroneous ruling. We don't find anywhere in the Talmud, in my view, a decision claimed to be erroneous because it was based on misinterpretation of the law.
חזרו להורות כדברי.
חזרו להורות כבית שמאי, חזרו להורות כבית הלל, is not, I don't think it has anything to do with error in the sense that we are talking about. There is a discussion around the table, and people come up with one idea, people come up with a different idea, and then in the process of discussion, some people were able to convince the others. So it's not an error. It was in the dynamic of the discussion, of the Shakla Vitalia.
But being convinced that the alternative interpretation is more correct than you, it's by definition recognizing that your previous interpretation was false.
Yeah, but the error has no significance in the sense that you have now to act differently. Error would make sense if on the basis of erroneous ruling, erroneous decision, something will follow. There is no consequence for erroneous ruling, on the sense that it was interpreted differently.
Okay,
I just want to, I agree with Benny that it seems to be unassailable that theology has effect, reflect, and I'm not quite sure about the difference between the words reflect and generate. I'm not quite sure about that, because if you take Lechatchila and B'diavad, the fact that it reflects could also mean that it's generated by a certain conception of God. And with Harvey, I think I'm not sure you essentially disagree. It's to be more cautious in terms of what we discern as a certain theology, how we can discern it, how it's evolved. But surely, I mean, you mentioned Christianity. Surely Christian theology had a completely different approach. In fact, structural approach, maybe leading to abrogation because of the theological notions of God. I mean, that Christianity develops a whole new structure of law, or destructure of law. So I think all of you can, in a sense, work together and refine Benny's essential thesis. I'm not quite sure there's an essential disagreement, but at the end of the day, what it requires is people from different disciplines. So when you talk about biblical theology, of course, you're going to get, if we had biblical scholars here, I'm sure we'd have a lot of flack, right? So that's what I wanted to ask you. So even when we talk about ne'elam, the word ne'elam, I mean, a biblical scholar is going to come here and tell you ne'elam doesn't mean what all you guys are talking about, right? Doesn't mean what the jurists or the jurisprudential guys are, bring to the table. But that's one of the things that I wanted to ask. So when you talk about a different theology, a different theological conception, you basically talked about Hastarat Panim as opposed to Gilui Shem, the lines of communication. But when you talk about the evolution of theology, there could be, have you looked at, this is primarily, I guess, the Benny, the basic notion of God. So biblical scholars would say biblical theology is not talking about a God, right? I mean, you actually mentioned that, you said gods or God, right? They would say monolatry rather than. So it's not a matter of Hastarat Panim, it's a matter of actually the theology, biblical theology is not monotheistic. So does the change from monolatry or a pagan notion of God where there are other gods, to a notion maybe in the Talmudic time where there is only one God, maybe some demons hanging around and so, right? Does that have an effect on the structural?
No doubt that our talk here is not about the biblical theology, but of course, no doubt that if you take into account the options that the biblical writers have a pagan notion of God, so of course we can assume that there will be dramatic legal effects to such a notion. But okay, this is a session for biblical researchers. But if we will bring some guy like Yechezkel Koifman into the table, so of course he will tell us that the picture has much more monolithic aspect than the pagan one, and even though we can find here and there some traces of pagan understanding of God, the basic idea is about monotheism, be the meaning of monotheism as it be. So I agree with you that if we take other pictures of biblical theology as right, of course we will expect it to see some effects in its legal structure, but this opened a new open a door for a new discussion or other discussion about biblical theology. So actually I agree.
Thank you for your questions. It's time to close this session. I want to thank our speakers for their wonderful presentations. Please join me.